What you can do with this video, as always, you can take notes as you go, maybe even look up today's paper and practice, pause, test yourself as you go, check the answers through along with the answers I provide, and repeat viewings of this. I've heard people get in touch and say how they've watched this over multiple times now, and it's really useful to do that. Really reinforces your understanding. So the basics of this paper are as follows. You're given two non-fiction articles. These articles, one will be a modern article and the other will be an article from the 19th century. Both articles will be on the same or similar subject. They could be on, for example, natural disasters, they could be on world events. They will share a common theme, and it's important to remember that. In addition, there will be 6 questions worth 40 marks in total with a 1-hour time limit. As well as this, the best advice I can offer from having taught this for over 10 years now is the following. Make sure you're clearly quoting. You have to use these quotation marks. Quotes mean marks, and you'll see later on in this video how if you fail to quote, it can lead to some rather devastating consequences, so don't be that person. As well as this, make sure you're referring to the correct text. Look carefully at what the text is that you have to answer on, and it's 1 mark per minute. Make sure to manage your time effectively. You should be spending at least 10, if not 12 minutes on a 10-mark question, for example. These are the real big hitters in this paper. So moving forward, we start, as always, with the practice question. It's from the 2017 paper. There are always 6 questions. Now look something like this. This is today's paper from the autumn 2017 set. You can freely find this online if you do a quick search of EDUCAS November 2017 English language. Now questions 1 and 2 are always on one specific article. Question 1 will ask you to locate and retrieve information. Very quick, very snappy questions worth 3 marks. Question 2 is a how question. This is your first 10 marker. Then questions 3 and 4 are from the other article. It's really important to remember that. Again, question 3 is a locate and retrieve question, requires a little more detail, whereas question 4 is an evaluate question. And lastly, the last pair, questions 5 and 6, are comparative questions on both articles. Question 5 is a 4-mark question. Question 6 is a comparison question worth 10 marks. So, let's begin with question 1. It's a locate and retrieve question. Tip here, it should be 3 easy marks, but it is easy to make silly mistakes and lose marks on this question. So be very, very mindful of what you put down. Question goes like this. Read the newspaper article, Wales Under Threat Again, in the separate resource material. When was the international agreement to stop commercial whaling? Where are Greenpeace activists trying to stop Japanese whaling taking place? And how many Sea Shepherd protesters were arrested for trying to stop the whale hunt? The Faroe Islands. Make sure you read the correct article. As I've said already, Wales Under Threat Again is the article. And make sure that you have covered everything you need to in as clear a detail as you can. Read that question carefully. If in doubt, underline what it is they're asking you to look for. The answers will be from any part of the article. So unlike the fiction reading paper, don't need to rule off, as it requires the entire article itself. At this point, you're welcome to take a pause if you wish to attempt these questions. Leave a comment below as well if you have any further questions, or if you've even attempted this, let me know how you get on. I'd love to know. So, the answers are as following. 1 mark is awarded for 1986, the Antarctic Ocean, and 5. Notice those answers are really, really simple. The simplest answers you can possibly write are in this question. So now we move on to question 2. It's our how question. It's a 10-mark question. The question here is, how does the writer try to persuade the reader that the hunting of whales is cruel and unacceptable? So, first of all, underline the keywords in the question. In this case, it's how. So this is how question. Persuading the reader that hunting of whales is cruel and unacceptable. Remember, for this one, you need at least 8 different points from across the article. My recommendation is to provide your point. So one way the writer tries to persuade the reader is, and then provide a quote, and then what I call a mini dig, a very short explanation on how it might just persuade, would be really, really vital and really, really useful. So, how would I start if I was answering this question? Well, I would do something like this. Firstly, the call to action at the beginning of the article stating we need to, quote, dust down the slogan "Save the Whale," end quote, to help whales, quote, again, is aimed at making readers feel they need to do something to help. Notice straight in, right off the bat, and then there's quotes embedded as well. That would gain a mark. The writer then states that, quote, over 2,000 whales, end quote, have been killed, quote, this year, end quote. Again, embedding the quotes, really vital. It is aimed at shocking us into action. This is a huge number, and it's happening right now, so we can stop it if we try. Again, another mark is awarded. The writer calls this, quote, the biggest whale slaughter for a generation, end quote, which suggests that this is the worst it's been for many years. And the word slaughter, again quotations, suggests the whales' deaths have been very brutal and cruel, which is aimed at making readers feel sorry for the whales. 2 marks would be awarded there. Very quick, very mechanical almost in its manner. Carry on from here if you wish to achieve more marks. This would be a full 10 marker, but it certainly, if it carried on in this manner, would get there. Don't forget, don't waste time waffling. Just state that point, short embedded quote, a little mini dig, and move on. Notice in that process where those green ticks lie. It's a quote and move on, a quote and move on. That's exactly the method you want to do for this paper. Some other areas you could have considered, you'll see here, there are a wide range. The examination board give you an awful lot to cover on such a question. It's important you can cover as many as you can. 8, however, will do. You'll always have more than enough to comment on. Now we're on to question 3, which is our locate and retrieve question. Another tip I'd offer is there should be 3 easy marks, but it's very easy to make silly mistakes and lose marks on this. So, to answer the following questions, you'll need to read the extract on the opposite page by Henry Cheever. You see the 3 questions below, each worth 1 mark. Make sure you read the correct article. Questions 3 and 4 are always on the second article, as stated here. Now, again, read the question carefully. Underline what it is they're asking you to look for in the article, and these answers will be from any part, once again, of the article provided. Our answers are here. So they're a little bit more sophisticated than they were previously, but it's again very short, simple answers required. Now, question 4 is the evaluate question. There's a very different skill required here on question 4 for 10 marks that was on question 2. Question evaluate, what does it mean? It means to weigh up. These questions are asking for your opinion. On this paper, they might be worded in such different ways as, what do you think and feel about the writer's views? The writer makes this sound dramatic and interesting. How far do you agree? How far or to what extent do you agree? How successful do you think the writer was in getting their view across? So be very, very mindful of how this one will be worded. So, again, underlining keywords in the question, here's our question. The writer, Henry Cheever, gives his readers a clear and dramatic description of what it was like to take part in a whale hunt in the 1850s. How far do you agree with this statement? Notice that phrasing, how far. You should comment on what he says, how he says it, and whether you think the description of the whale hunt is clear and dramatic, and why. You must refer to the text to support your comments. So, key phrases here. This clear and dramatic description to take part in a whale hunt in the 1850s. How far do you agree? Now, what he says, how he says, and whether you think the description of the whale hunt is clear and dramatic and why are what we want to make sure we are looking at. Now here you'd need roughly about 7 different points from the article, and I recommend working with these sentence stems. I think, or I feel, or I believe. I think this is clear because, or this makes me feel it is dramatic because. Sticking to the focus, the central point of the question itself is really important. So, how do you start on such a question as an evaluate question? Well, here's an example from earlier. So, I agree to a large extent. Never go one way or the other in absolute totality. You want to make sure you have to a large extent. Notice that phrase. Now, get a mark for mentioning about standing by and lowering boats. Also, this idea of the exciting, dramatic aspect of the thrilling noise. Another quote there on little more than half a mile away, showing it's about to begin. Words such as chase, suggesting speed and that the whale is in sight. Again, a very strong start. You're more than welcome to continue should you wish to. And again, any questions, leave them as a comment below, and I will get back to everyone, as is the Wiglet promise. So don't waste time waffling. Again, state the point, use the quote, say why it's clear and dramatic, and say I think or I feel for each point. Really vital that you make sure to do that. Some other points you may consider can be seen here straight from the examination board themselves, and there are again a range. You notice this range, it goes from every little aspect there are. So don't feel as though a point is too basic or obvious to mention. I would in fact encourage you to bring as many as you can to fulfill that 7 and to get as many marks as you possibly can. Now, question 5 is our synthesize question. So the first question requires us to look at both articles. Questions 5 and 6 ask you to use both in your answers. Question 5 is worth 4 marks and should be quite straightforward. Now the key here is to be specific. Look for the specific thing they're asking you to look for. In this question, using both texts and using information from both texts, you need to explain briefly, that's really important, briefly in your own words, how whales were hunted in 1850 and are now hunted in the Faroe Islands. So both texts, and the hunt in the 19th century and the hunt in the Faroe Islands in the modern day. Very important you get the distinguishing differences, but be really sharp and specific. 2 points from each article will do. That's all you require. So, a synthesized question like this. What do we know about how whales were hunted in 1850 and now in the Faroe Islands? Well, here is a table composed from earlier that shows you the examples you'd need. And there's plenty there. You'd only need 2 from each article to achieve the full 4 marks of the question. Here's my example. In Cheever's text, the hunters leave a large ship and get into small boats to hunt one whale. But in the Faroe Islands, the hunters are just in small boats and hunting many whales. Notice it calls what I apply it applies what I call the tennis style method. It goes in Cheever's text, modern text, Cheever's text, modern text. So it goes back and forth, very quick, very specific. There is no more than 3 developed sentences there. You should spend no more time than that to make sure you get to question 6. Question 6 is our last one of the paper, and it's the comparison question. Which comparative connectives do you know? Think about this. If it's similarities, similarly, also, likewise, this is similar to, work very well. When there are differences, however, unlike, conversely, in contrast, and this is different to, are all very effective. So it's really important to make sure you have those there. Just take a pause there, write them down, and again, leave a comment if there's any you can think of that could help add to these lists. That'd be very much appreciated. So, question itself, both of these texts contain accounts of the hunting of whales. Compare the writer's attitudes to the hunting of whales in the 1850s and in the recent whale hunt in the Faroe Islands, and how the writers get across their attitudes to their readers. Underline keywords in the question as always, as you see here. Read the question carefully. Which part of the modern text should you be referring to in this question? It's very important you have an awareness of that. If you don't, support your comments with textual evidence, and you don't make it clear which text you're referring to, you will get 0 marks. Make it clear in the Cheever text, or in the 19th century text and the modern text, in the modern article, or in the 19th century article. Be clear on which text you are taking from. Otherwise, you will not get marks. I cannot stress the importance of that. So you need at least 4 different comparison points from each article. Use those comparative connectives from the previous slide all the time, and say what the writer's attitudes are and comment on how they use words to make their attitudes clear. Really important. Use that tennis style approach again. Go from the 19th century to the modern, 19th century to modern, back and forth, to gain mastery of the question itself. So pause at this point if you wish to have a go yourself, and again leave a comment if there's any questions you may have. You have to compare in order to get marks, and therefore it is best to make a point about one text and then have a comparative point about the other, what I call that tennis style method, back and forth, back and forth. So my model example is here just to begin with. In Cheever's article from the 1850s, his attitude towards the whale hunt is positive. He describes the hunt as a battle between a huge creature and a melon, quote, small boats, suggesting the hunters are brave for daring to kill the whale. In contrast, the writer of the modern article implies the hunters are sly, as they, quote, herded the, quote, innocent whales ashore, where they were, quote, ruthlessly slaughtered. Notice how the quotes is just peppered in, sort of embedded in, very subtly, very effectively. Little and often. The quotes are tiny. Sometimes they're only one word, you'll notice. Herded implies the whales are compelled to obey the hunters on the boats, whereas the whale in Cheever's texts fights against the hunters with, quote, fury, creating the idea that it is like a monster. So what's good about this? It clearly states which article the information is from. It uses evidence to back up the points, as seen there. It comments on how the writer gets views across, so it does a little mini dig, as it were, and it uses comparative connectives, such as in contrast, to really make sure that all those skills are interwoven and used to full effect. So, some other points you could use can be seen here. There are a wide range. Again, remember, it's not going to be that there are only a finite amount. It's going to be a rather large amount for what you need on such a demanding question. Just make sure you give yourself enough time to get to question 6. That's